And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Tuesday morning, a lot of marginal VFR continues to cover the Bering Sea and the Aleutians, right on up into Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island. Across southern Alaska here, VFR in the central interior there from around St. Lawrence Island all the way over into the Yukon. More marginal VFR, Koyukuk Valley, some IFR over the central Brooks Range, at least to start the day. And then an area of IFR pulling off the eastern Arctic coast. And for the Panhandle, mostly marginal. And for the afternoon, that pattern continues. Marginal VFR here extending into the Gulf of Alaska. Along the North Gulf Coast, some improvement here over southern Alaska, becoming mostly VFR. Still some marginal VFR here in the upper Tanana Valley, down into portions of the Copper River Basin. Marginal also for the North Slope out to the Arctic coast from Wainwright eastward. And still a lot of marginal VFR out over the Bering Sea, but some improvement going on here for the Aleutians. And then for Wednesday morning, a lot of IFR moves into the Arctic coast, right on down to the Brooks Range here. Marginal VFR down into portions of the Yukon, upper Yukon Valley areas, or most of the Yukon Flats, and portions of the Koyukuk Valley. VFR, Northern Cook Inlet, Mananuska-Susitna Valley, Copper River Basin. Otherwise, marginal VFR here for portions of the Southern Cook Inlet area, out to the southwest mountains there. And mostly marginal continues over the Bering Sea and the Aleutians. Marginal VFR from the North Gulf Coast. And some IFR over the northern Panhandle and areas along the eastern border. And for the afternoon hours, back to marginal VFR here for the southeast coast. Lingering IFR there around the Yakutat area. And then marginal VFR into Prince William Sound and at least the southeastern Copper River Basin. Pretty good conditions for the afternoon Wednesday here. South central Alaska forecast to be VFR, Kodiak Island, Bristol Bay. And still marginal VFR over the Koyukuk Valley up across the Brooks Range to the Arctic coast. Improving out here over the eastern Bering Sea, some good VFR showing up in this area. And then becoming marginal, Adak and Atka. And with the next storm, IFR pushing into the western Aleutians. Passes up to the north for the Brooks Range, Anatuvik and Adigan. Marginal VFR becoming VFR. And Lake Clark and Merrill. VFR tomorrow, hopefully rainy VFR as well. Windy looking pretty good, as is Isabel. Mintesta, marginal VFR. Tanita, marginal VFR becoming VFR. And for Portage, pretty much marginal throughout the day. And Chilkoot and White, same forecast, marginal VFR. Freezing levels, 2,000 to 4,000 feet here. Mostly 2,000 feet over the central interior. And that extends up to the eastern Arctic coast, and about the same for the Panhandle, around 2,000 feet. Cold air out here to the west pushes 2,000 feet right off the chart there at the surface tomorrow morning, south of the Alaska Peninsula across the eastern Aleutians, hugging the North Gulf Coast. And icing, considerable moderate rime icing here for the Panhandle, up to about Yakutat across the Gulf of Alaska into Kodiak Island, and another batch up here over the area of the eastern interior, 40-mile country there down to Fairbanks, northward a little bit there, and then lighter icing threats out to the southwest coast, ending nothing out over the Bering Sea at all, or the Aleutians. Jet stream here showing trough low pressure at 33,000 feet, and we've got northerly winds on the back side of that, way out here to the west at about 80 knots. Stronger jet here, just clipping the western Aleutians out of the northwest up to 125 knots. Southwest flow here across the Pacific, 65 to 80 knots there into the Panhandle. And at about 9,000 feet, 40 to 50 knots south-southwest winds across the southeast coast. Roughly about 35 knots there for the eastern North Gulf Coast, 40 knots out of the southeast up over the eastern Brooks Range. And then low pressure here, northern Bering Sea, south to southeast winds 40 to 45 knots there on the west side here, and over the western part of the state. And then northerlies 50 knots here, diminishing to 35 knots by the time they reach the Aleutians. And from there, taking a look at 3,000 feet, pretty light wind conditions here at this elevation, only 25 knots there out over the west central Aleutians. Stronger winds with this low tracking northeastward into the Gulf of Alaska. Southeast 45 to 65 knots approaching the Queen Charlottes and the central and southern coast of the Panhandle. 40 knots out of the east there for the North Gulf Coast, and a band of 30-knot winds blowing across the Barren Islands into Kamishak Bay. And as far as turbulence goes, looking at considerable moderate turbulence here for the North Gulf Coast into southern Prince William Sound, most of the Panhandle, and way out to the west here for Kiska and Amchitka Islands.